Hello, I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Welcome to Alzheimer's, the Science of Prevention. I'd like to talk today about the importance of nature, getting out into nature. We now understand that being in nature is actually powerfully therapeutic for our bodies, for our brains, and even affects the wiring of our brains, enhancing our ability to make good decisions. And certainly these days, we can use all the help that we can get. So what is it about getting out into nature that's so valuable for us? Well, first of all, we know that getting out into nature, experiencing the natural world, does two important things. It lowers inflammation, and that's certainly very important when we consider inflammation in the context of Alzheimer's disease and things like Parkinson's, but also inflammation in the context of COVID-19. We recognize that one of the important events that occurs with COVID-19 infection is this dramatic amplification of inflammation called the cytokine storm. So we need everything on board that triggers our body's ability to decrease inflammation. Yes, the right diet. Yes, making sure we're getting enough restorative sleep. Yes, timing of our meals. Yes, periodic fasting, meditation, and, as mentioned, getting out into nature. Very, very important. The other thing that nature does is it lowers cortisol, the stress hormone, and we're certainly going to explore that in great depth in the program. Cortisol not only threatens brain cells directly, especially those cells in the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, the area that is certainly targeted in Alzheimer's disease, but cortisol in addition amplifies inflammation by destabilizing the gut lining and increasing gut leakiness or permeability, if you will, and that secondarily can increase inflammation as well. Now, getting out into nature, very important. It may not be anything right now that you have access to, but don't despair. You can increase your exposure to nature by simply having a houseplant, bringing a plant in from outside, or having somebody bring you a houseplant that you put in your living room or in your kitchen, and even looking at photographs or paintings of natural scenery has also been shown to be really helpful in terms of the response that you get, like lowering cortisol. So don't forget about reconnecting with nature. Good for your brain and good for your immune system. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Thanks for joining me. Hello, I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. You know, one of the fundamental courses of action that we recommend in Alzheimer's, the Science of Prevention, is to start paying attention to the quality and quantity of the sleep that you get. So underrated in modern society is the importance of a good night's sleep. Why? Well, first, let's just take a step back. You know, we talk about diet, we talk about exercise. Yes, very important, but we don't spend a third of our lives eating, or most of us hopefully don't, or a third of our lives exercising, and yet we should be sleeping for about 7 to 8 hours every single 24-hour period. It turns out that adds up to be about a third of our lives. It means it's darn important. And in the context of Alzheimer's disease, let's just talk for a moment about why it is so darn important. We recognize the importance of not getting a good night's sleep in terms of relationship to Alzheimer's disease risk, but also relationship to risk for things like obesity, coronary artery disease, and even type 2 diabetes. Why that matters as it relates to Alzheimer's is because coronary artery disease, diabetes, and obesity are indeed risk factors for Alzheimer's disease in the first place. And why might that be? Well, two important reasons. First of all, not getting a good night's sleep powerfully increases inflammation in the human body. Alzheimer's and Parkinson for that matter, and diabetes, obesity, and coronary artery disease, all of the degenerative conditions that so plague us are all inflammatory. So one powerful lever that we can pull to reduce inflammation is to concentrate on getting a good night's sleep. Not just quantity, but quality as well. We want to have sleep that's as uninterrupted as possible, that allows us to drift off not only into REM sleep, but deep sleep as well. And that takes us to our second point. The important mechanism that we look at when we are advocating for a good night's sleep in terms of Alzheimer's risk. And that is that during sleep, and in particular during deep sleep, our bodies activate what is called the glymphatic system. And basically, the glymphatic system, which was only recently discovered, is a powerful system whereby your brain is actually able to rid itself of so many of the toxic accumulants during the course of the day. We accumulate various toxins, various misfolded proteins, etc. during the course of the day. And basically the garbage is taken out, if you will, during sleep, and particularly during deep sleep. This is activation of the glymphatic system. You know, that would tend to be very important when you think about the fact that we're accumulating these toxic metabolites all day long. And ultimately, we have this wonderful mechanism whereby we're able to basically take out the garbage, and that is this activation of our glymphatic system when we are in deep sleep. Now, many may think, well, I have a good night's sleep. I sleep for 8 hours. Don't feel so great the next day. What may be going on? And I would indicate it's certainly worthwhile to begin exploring some of the wearable devices that can give you information not just in terms of how long you think you slept the night before, but what is the quality of that sleep? How much time did you spend in deep sleep, in REM sleep? How long did it take you to go to sleep? How many times, for example, did you awaken that you may not be aware of? So this is all very important. And I'd like to say that we need to value sleep for another reason that's very important these days. And that is that sleep powerfully augments and balances our immune system. And certainly immune function is very much top of mind these days as we are faced with the challenges presented by COVID-19. So while people are talking about taking this nutritional supplement and that, and certainly I think there is value to things like zinc and vitamin D, I think the idea of a good night's sleep for balancing the immune system is really fundamentally important. So let's go ahead and dive into why sleep is important. Hello, I'm Dr. David Perlmutter, and welcome to Alzheimer's, the Science of Prevention. What's in a name? The prevention of Alzheimer's disease. Think about it. We generally accept the notion that many of our lifestyle factors are important as it relates to, for example, heart disease. We've known for many years, we've been aware of this so-called Heart Smart diet. But when did you last actually hear about a Brain Smart diet? Well, it turns out that there is an incredible amount of data, a robust data set that's been accumulating over the past 15 to 20 years that is really quite clear that there is a powerful relationship between our food choices and our risk for brain degeneration. So in a sense, there really is a Brain Smart diet. And we have to look at what are the mechanisms for brain degeneration that can be targeted with diet. So the three mechanisms that I would like to explore include inflammation, the action of what are called free radicals, and how we nurture our gut bacteria, the microbiome, if you will, the trillions of bacteria that live within the gut. Why that's important is it turns out that gut bacteria are manufacturing various chemicals that will either help our brains be healthy or pave the way towards degeneration. Ultimately, inflammation is a cornerstone mechanism as it relates to Alzheimer's disease itself, and certainly to other neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's. So we really want to focus on an anti-inflammatory diet, a diet that doesn't challenge us with increasing the inflammatory response, with increasing the body's production of inflammatory mediators like cytokines that we are beginning to hear quite a bit about, certainly in another context that we're going to talk about in just a minute. So diets that are, for example, lower in refined carbohydrates, like sugars and certainly ultra-processed foods, are diets that are basically designed to help us reduce inflammation. The other thing that we have to consider is that there is this very powerful relationship between elevation of blood sugar and brain degeneration, and through this mechanism of inflammation, that might be the relationship. We know that when blood sugar is elevated, a couple of things are going on that are detrimental to the brain. First, the higher the level of blood sugar over a period of time, the less able we are to recognize the action of a hormone called insulin in the brain. The brain becomes, if you will, insulin resistant. We need the action of insulin to help the brain power itself with an important fuel called glucose. Now, that doesn't mean we should be eating more sugar to power the brain. The more that glucose is elevated, the less able insulin is to do its job. So we want to try to eat a diet that helps to control blood sugar, and that is a diet that's lower in sugar. Higher sugar diet, higher blood sugar, the less responsive our brains become to the hormone insulin. So that's an important consideration for a lower refined carbohydrate diet. The other thing to consider is getting back to our concept of inflammation, that when blood sugar is elevated, there are changes that take place to the proteins in the body called glycation. The binding of sugar to proteins in the body is called glycation. And that happens when our blood sugar is chronically elevated. Now, many have heard of A1C. Diabetics, for example, are frequently having their A1C tested because it's a marker of their average blood sugar over a several month period of time. You see television commercials, for example, touting this or that drug because it's helpful for lowering people's A1C. Again, A1C is a nice metric because it gives us a sense of the average blood sugar, but fundamentally it is showing us what is the average blood sugar, yes, but it's showing us through the lens of how blood sugar binds to protein. Why is that important? It's important because when sugar binds to protein, this process of glycation, as revealed by the A1C, that directly increases inflammation. So when you see, for example, an elevation of the A1C to 6.5 or to 7, that is an indication, a surrogate marker for increased inflammation in the human body. And as a matter of fact, there is a direct correlation between the level of the hemoglobin A1C, or commonly known A1C, and the rate at which the brain actually shrinks. So this marker of A1C that we see so commonly described relates to diet, because diet will raise the blood sugar, will lead to inflammation. And as we know, markers of inflammation, as we're going to learn through our next segment, are related to increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. So this is all very important because we can change these parameters. We can lower our blood sugar. We can reduce inflammation by making specific dietary changes, not just, oddly enough, in the foods that we choose to eat, but also in the timing of our foods, the how we eat the foods, and most importantly, when we eat our food. Now, the last mechanism that we need to explore is the action of what are called free radicals. These are damaging chemicals that are produced normally during our metabolism of fuel, be it fat or carbohydrate. And it's these damaging chemicals that can lead to damage to our DNA, to our protein, and even to our fat, which is an important constituent of the covering over nerve cells. So we really want to eat a diet then that has higher levels of nice antioxidants in it. Mostly these are derived from rich, colorful vegetables, rich in antioxidants. And we have to consider that foods that are highly processed and overly cooked, for example, can actually degrade the body's endogenous antioxidant defenses. So what does then the diet look like? The ideal brain diet is a diet that targets inflammation. It's a diet that's high in complex carbohydrates, specifically dietary fiber. Why? Because dietary fiber nurtures the gut bacteria, and the gut bacteria play an important role in keeping the gut lining intact. When the gut lining degrades, perhaps because of dietary indiscretion, that amplifies inflammation. We want a diet that's actually, believe it or not, higher in fat, but very specifically in good fat, not the highly processed vegetable oils that are so common in the standard American diet. If you choose to consume animal products, make sure that your meat and dairy choices and even your egg choices are good choices, meaning organic, grass-fed, free-range, if that's at all possible to you. And keep in mind that we don't really want to have an overabundance of protein in the diet. So what does the plate look like? By and large, the plate will be one that is demonstrating mostly colorful, a variety of vegetables, mostly a plant-based meal. And again, if you choose to have animal sources of protein, then as I previously described. Keep in mind that your food choices play a dramatic role in determining the set point, if you will, of inflammation in the body. And inflammation is the cornerstone of brain degenerative conditions. Interestingly, in the times in which we find ourselves today, immunity and inflammation are certainly central in our conversations, aren't they? As it relates to infection with COVID-19, the virus of COVID-19, we want to have a balanced immune system, and we certainly want to keep inflammation in check. After all, this cytokine storm that is really one of the events that occurs that often leads to fatality is an event of just an overabundance of the production of the chemicals of inflammation called cytokines. So it's really now that we absolutely should be doubling down on our commitment to not only the foods that we choose, but even the timing of our foods. And we're going to learn that ideas like fasting and time-restricted eating are actually very, very important to help us with brain health, to help us with balancing our immune systems. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoy the program. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Hello, I'm Dr. David Perlmutter, and welcome to Alzheimer's, the Science of Prevention. Well, we've all heard that exercise is good for us, that's for sure. And why is it good for us? Well, we feel better, that's good to know, right? We know that it's good for our hearts, we know that it helps build stronger muscles and stronger bones, and we know that stronger muscles and bones are associated with disease resistance and even longevity. But here's the important secret. Physical exercise is good for your brain. Study after study is revealing that those individuals who engage in even mild to moderate exercise have a dramatically reduced risk for Alzheimer's, a disease for which there is no treatment. Now, there are a lot of mechanisms that are being explored that are trying to correlate why regular exercise is so good for your brain. And we'll explore this in just a moment, but I'd like to digress for just a second because we know that regular exercise is associated with a more balanced, a more robust immune system. And these days, as we are challenged by COVID-19, that turns out to be very important. So in your toolbox for a better immune system should certainly be regular exercise. Now let's get back to the brain. The mechanisms that relate exercise to better brain health include, number one, exercise is associated with decreased inflammation. We understand that inflammation is a cornerstone mechanism as it relates to degeneration of the brain. Number two, exercise is related to stress. And we're going to do a deep dive into stress and how that is so threatening for brain health and even how stress threatens the immune system. Exercise, a wonderful offset for stress. Number three, exercise actually changes our gene expression. Think about that. We can, by engaging physical exercise, change the expression of our DNA, our life code. We can amplify the expression of a gene that codes for a chemical called BDNF. Now, I know we're getting a bit technical here, but basically, exercise turns on our body's production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. What in the heck is that? BDNF allows our brains to develop new brain cells. We can grow new brain cells when we have higher levels of BDNF, and the brain cells that we have are able to connect more functionally in the presence of BDNF. We call the growth of new brain cells neurogenesis, and we call the connection of brain cells neuroplasticity. Both neurogenesis and neuroplasticity are enhanced by BDNF, and your most powerful tool for increasing BDNF in your body is physical exercise. Other things that you can do to increase BDNF include, for example, using turmeric in your cooking, using DHA, the omega-3 as a nutritional supplement, and even fasting increases BDNF. So physical exercise is really important in a brain health program and also for establishing and maintaining good immune function. Hello, I'm Dr. David Perlmutter, and welcome to Alzheimer's, the Science of Prevention. You know, one fundamental player that really relates to brain degeneration is stress. We hear about that every single day, especially these days. And, you know, we're going to talk about stress in just a moment in the context of COVID-19. But let's get back to the topic at hand, and that is Alzheimer's and basically brain degeneration in general. We know that chronic stress is detrimental to the brain for at least two important reasons. First, chronic stress increases inflammation. Inflammation is a cornerstone mechanism that relates to Alzheimer's disease and degeneration and even loss of brain cells. So we've got to do everything we can to reduce inflammation. In this program, we are certainly talking about many things that we can engage in our day-to-day lifestyle choices, like the foods we eat, like the timing of our meals, like the exercise we get, and certainly the value of sleep, all through the lens of limiting inflammation, because inflammation is detrimental to the brain. And as we are now learning, inflammation is certainly threatening to the immune system, and that's important information. But that said, we know that chronic stress can do the same. Chronic stress amplifies this cardinal mechanism that's involved in brain degeneration, inflammation. Keep in mind that inflammation is also a cornerstone mechanism in things like diabetes, coronary artery disease, and even obesity. And why are we hearing so much about these chronic degenerative conditions these days? Because as we know, they are associated with increased risk for bad outcome as it relates to COVID-19. So all of the things that we are presenting that relates to inflammation should be looked upon as being important lifestyle changes that we incorporate, not just for the health of our brains, but for the health of our immune systems as well, and likely because they may help us deal with this infection should this become something that we are exposed to. Now, chronic stress amplifies inflammation, and it also does something very important in the context of Alzheimer's disease. Chronic stress increases a chemical called cortisol. Some call cortisol the stress hormone. And what does cortisol do? Chronic elevation of cortisol has been demonstrated in rodents and in primates and in humans to directly cause damage to cells in an area of the brain called the hippocampus. Some have called the hippocampus the memory center, and rightfully so. We know that the hippocampus plays such an important role in memory function. We know that degeneration of the hippocampus is something that is seen early on in Alzheimer's disease, so we need to do everything we can to focus on how we protect this area of the brain, the hippocampus. Again, elevation of cortisol, the stress hormone, is related to degeneration of the hippocampus. So what do we do about lowering cortisol? Well, several things I'd like you to consider. First, meditation, and we're going to cover that in the program in just a few moments. Meditation is very important because it directly lowers cortisol. So we're going to explore that in the program. Another thing that helps to lower cortisol is nature exposure, getting out into nature. It's been shown, for example, that people who simply are exposed to a natural environment, even in an urban setting, like visiting a park, for example, even in a city, demonstrate lower levels of salivary cortisol, and it happens very quickly. So we've got to recognize that chronically exposing ourselves to stress, chronically bombarding ourselves with fear-inducing news, being online, reading threatening information, and certainly there is plenty of it these days, increases our body's sense that we are under threat. It activates our fight or flight mechanisms and increases cortisol. That is not good for the brain. So, important message there. Limit our exposure to this threatening information. It is certainly good to be informed, but chronically, day in and day out, exposing ourselves to this negativity basically isn't good for us in terms of our brains and threatens the functionality of our immune systems.